At 2:14 inches the morning, radar operators aboard a U.S. Navy destroyer in the eastern Mediterranean watched their screens fill with incoming tracks. Not 2, not 10. Over 100 simultaneous signatures moving at speeds that gave the intercept computers less than 90 seconds to respond. This is not a drill. This is not a war game. This is the scenario that defense planners in Washington and Jerusalem spent years insisting could not happen at this scale. Tonight, we are going to walk through exactly how it did. For decades, Iron Dome has been sold to the world as the shield that makes Israel untouchable, a 90% kill rate, battle-tested, reliable. What the briefings never emphasized is what that shield was actually designed to stop, and more importantly, what it was never built to handle. Iran did not attack the strength of Israeli air defense. Iran attacked the gap that was always there, and they did it with a missile program 30 years in the making. The strikes you are seeing in the headlines right now are not the beginning of this conflict. They are the visible surface of something that has been moving underneath for a very long time. Behind every launch tonight is a decision made months ago, a target list compiled years ago, and a strategic calculation that neither Washington nor Jerusalem has fully answered publicly. By the end of this video, you will understand not just what happened, but why it happened now, who benefits from the chaos, and what the next 72 hours could look like for every nation with a stake in this region. Because once this particular threshold gets crossed, there is no quiet way back. Every war has a moment when the old rules stop applying. Tonight is that moment. The introduction showed you the radar screens lighting up, but what those screens could not show is what came before them. The months of repositioning, the weeks of final preparation, and the single command that set everything in motion at once. Across 3 separate launch sites in western Iran, missile batteries that had been silent for months received their activation sequence within the same 60-second window. This was not a reactive strike. The timing was too precise, the coordination too clean. What unfolded over the next 4 hours was the execution of a plan that had been war-gamed, revised, and rehearsed long before the first international headline declared a crisis. By 3 a.m., air raid sirens were active simultaneously in Tel Aviv, Haifa, and Eilat. 3 different cities, 3 different threat vectors. One single coordinated operation designed to stretch Israeli air defense across its maximum geographic limit at the exact same moment. That is not improvisation, that is architecture. Understanding that architecture is the only way to understand everything that follows, and it starts with the system that was supposed to stop all of this. The most dangerous lie in modern warfare is not a false report or a propaganda broadcast. It is a system that works perfectly, right up until the moment it does not. We just watched Iran execute a coordinated launch across 3 separate vectors simultaneously. Now we need to understand why the shield that was supposed to stop it was never actually designed for this fight. Iron Dome entered operational service in 2011. In the years that followed, it intercepted thousands of unguided rockets fired from Gaza and southern Lebanon. The numbers were real, the success rate was real, but the threat it was defeating was also specific. Short-range projectiles, subsonic speeds, low-altitude trajectories, and launch points close enough that radar acquisition happened well before impact. Iron Dome was built for that threat profile, and against that threat profile, it performed exactly as designed. Iran's ballistic missiles operate in a categorically different physical environment. The Shakan, which entered service in 2022, reaches speeds above Mach 8 during its terminal descent phase. At that velocity, the intercept window compresses to under 90 seconds from first detection to point of impact. The Tamir interceptor missiles that Iron Dome fires were not engineered to chase a target moving at that speed on that trajectory. The geometry simply does not work. In the early hours of the attack, Israeli defense batteries fired repeated intercept attempts against the incoming ballistic tracks. Footage confirmed launches. What the official statements did not confirm was the intercept rate against that specific category of missile, because that number told a story that no government press office wanted to lead with. What Iran understood, and what the public briefings consistently obscured, is that Iron Dome and ballistic missile defense are 2 entirely separate problems requiring 2 entirely separate solutions. Deploying one while the other gap remains open is not a defense strategy, it is a carefully maintained illusion. And last night, that illusion met reality at Mach 8. The question now is not whether Iran found the gap. The question is how long they have known exactly where it was. Most weapons programs are built to fight the next war. Iran built this one to survive every war in between. The coordinated launch you just saw did not come from nowhere. It came from a decision made in 1985, in the middle of a grinding 8-year war with Iraq, when Iranian commanders watched Scud missiles land on Tehran and understood something that would shape their entire military doctrine for the next 3 decades. The country that controls the skies controls the outcome, and Iran did not control the skies. What followed was not a weapons procurement program. It was a generational engineering project. Iran acquired its first ballistic missiles from Libya and North Korea in the mid-1980s, reverse-engineered the propulsion systems, and began building domestic production capacity before the Iran-Iraq War had even ended. By the mid-1990s, Iranian engineers were not copying foreign designs anymore. They were improving on them. By 2010, they were producing missiles that no foreign supplier had ever handed them. By 2022, the Khaybar-Shekan entered service, a missile designed from the ground up with one specific operational requirement: penetrate layered Western-supplied air defense systems at terminal velocities that existing interceptors cannot match. That progression, from imported Scud variants to domestically engineered hypersonic-class ballistic missiles, took exactly 30 years. It survived the death of the Soviet Union, 4 American presidents, 3 rounds of crippling sanctions, and 2 decades of covert sabotage operations targeting its nuclear and missile infrastructure. The program did not slow down under pressure. Pressure made it more focused. What Iran built was not just a missile arsenal. It was a strategic insurance policy, one that could only be cashed at the moment of maximum leverage. That moment is now, and the strike that came next was not a reaction. It was the opening move of a plan written long before this crisis had a name. In warfare, the most dangerous attack is not the one that destroys the most. It is the one that proves something the enemy spent years insisting was impossible. 30 years of patient engineering just produced its first operational result. Now watch what Iran chose to do with it. The April strike on Israeli territory was not designed to maximize casualties. The target selection tells you that immediately. Iran's missiles are accurate enough and numerous enough to have focused entirely on population centers or critical infrastructure. They did not. The strike pattern distributed across military radar installations, an airbase in the Negev, and an intelligence facility in the north. Each target was chosen not for the damage it would cause, but for the message its destruction would send to a specific audience inside the Israeli defense establishment. Military planners call this a demonstration strike. The logic is precise. You do not reveal the full capability of your arsenal in the opening move. You reveal enough to force the enemy to recalculate every assumption they have been operating on, while keeping your most capable systems in reserve for the response that follows. Iran fired approximately 120 ballistic missiles that night. Intelligence assessments suggest their total operational inventory is several times that number. The strike was also timed with surgical deliberateness, launched between 2 and 3 a. local time. It maximized the psychological impact on civilian populations while compressing the decision window for Israeli and American commanders who had to assess, respond, and communicate with allies across multiple time zones simultaneously, all before sunrise. That compression of decision time was not accidental. It was the actual weapon, and it worked exactly as intended. But a message only matters if the right audience receives it. The next question is how Washington heard what Tehran was saying, and whether the answer it gave revealed more than it intended. There is a version of American power that looks unstoppable on paper. 2 carrier strike groups, 5th-generation aircraft, the most sophisticated command and control infrastructure ever assembled. And then there is the version that exists when every one of those assets is needed in 3 places at once. Iran's demonstration strike forced exactly that problem into the open. Within 72 hours of the initial attack, the United States repositioned USS Dwight D. Eisenhower and USS Gerald R. Ford into the eastern Mediterranean. On every network broadcast, that image of 2 carrier strike groups moving in formation read as overwhelming force projection. Inside the Pentagon, it read as something more uncomfortable. Washington had just publicly committed its 2 most visible strategic assets to a single theater, which meant every Iranian military planner could now calculate precisely what was not covering the Strait of Hormuz, what was not positioned to deter Hezbollah escalation in Lebanon, and what was not watching the Houthi launch corridors in Yemen. American alliance commitments require unconditional defense of Israel. That commitment is not negotiable politically, domestically, or diplomatically. But unconditional defense of one front in a multi-front strategy creates exploitable gaps, and Iran had spent years mapping exactly where those gaps would open the moment Washington made that move. The carriers did not project power. They announced a constraint. That constraint did not go unnoticed by the 4 proxy networks Iran had already activated before the first American ship changed course, and those networks did not wait for Washington to figure out what it had just revealed. While the world was watching the missile trails over Tel Aviv, Iran was already fighting a different war, one that had no single front, no single commander, and no single moment that any headline could point to as the beginning. The American carriers had just announced their position. Within the same 9 6-hour window, 4 separate networks activated in 4 separate theaters simultaneously. In southern Lebanon, Hezbollah launched its largest coordinated drone barrage against northern Israeli communities since October 2023. Not a provocation, not a warning shot. A sustained operation designed to force Israeli air defense batteries in the north to expend interceptors at the exact moment resupply chains were already under pressure from the ballistic missile campaign in the south. In Yemen, Houthi forces fired 3 anti-ship ballistic missiles at commercial vessels transiting the Red Sea corridor. Lloyd's of London responded within hours, raising war risk insurance premiums for the entire waterway to levels not seen since the 1991 Gulf War. Shipping companies began rerouting around the Cape of Good Hope, adding 12 days and millions of dollars in costs to every voyage. In Iraq, Shia militia groups conducted rocket attacks against American forward operating bases in Erbil and al-Assad within the same operational window. Not large enough to trigger a formal American military response, precisely large enough to force base commanders to activate defensive protocols and divert attention from the broader theater picture. In Syria, Iranian-aligned ground forces repositioned armored units in the Deir ez-Zor corridor, placing additional pressure on American special operations positions that were already operating at reduced capacity. 4 theaters, 4 separate command structures, 1 coordinated operational tempo that no single news cycle could contain in a single frame. This was not 4 incidents happening at the same time. This was one strategy executing across 4 simultaneous dimensions. And the architecture behind that strategy is something that Western military doctrine still does not have a clean answer for. 4 fronts activated in the same 9 6-hour window without a single intercepted coordination order. That does not happen by accident. It happens by design. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Quds Force does not operate like a conventional military command structure. It does not issue real-time orders that travel down a chain to proxy fighters waiting for instructions. What it built over 4 decades is something fundamentally different. A franchise model of warfare, where regional commanders operate with pre-authorized parameters agreed upon long in advance. They do not wait for Tehran to say go. They wait for a triggering condition that was already defined, and when that condition is met, the network moves on its own. This architecture has one decisive operational advantage. It cannot be decapitated. Removing a commander does not stop the network. It activates a succession protocol that was already in place before the strike that removed him. The United States learned this lesson repeatedly in Iraq between 2003 and 2011. It has not fully applied that lesson to the current theater, and Iran knows it. Western targeting doctrine assumes that destroying leadership nodes disrupts operational capacity. Against this network, it does the opposite. Every leadership strike Iran absorbs becomes a proof of concept that the architecture works without the leaders. That is the system now running across 4 simultaneous fronts, and its next pressure point is not a military base or a missile battery. It is a waterway that keeps the global economy moving. There is one pressure point in this entire conflict that no aircraft carrier can neutralize and no missile defense system can protect. It is 33 kilometers wide at its narrowest point, and 21% of the world's oil supply passes through it every single day. The command architecture just showed us how Iran fights without centralized orders. Now look at where that architecture is pointed. Iran has maintained anti-ship missile batteries, naval mine stockpiles, and fast attack boat swarms along the northern shore of the Strait of Hormuz for decades. Every serious wargame simulation of a full U.S.-Iran conventional conflict arrives at the same inflection point. Iran closes the strait, oil prices breach $200 per barrel within 2 weeks, and the economic damage to the global system exceeds the military damage of the conflict by an order of magnitude. This is not a hypothetical. It is the single leverage point that has constrained American military options against Iran since 1988. Every president who has considered military action against Tehran has received the same classified briefing about the strait, and every one of them has adjusted their calculus accordingly. The carriers are in the Mediterranean. The strait is uncontested. That gap is not invisible to Tehran. Every conflict reaches a point where the number of possible futures begins to narrow. That point is now. The strait remains open, but the pressure on it is real and documented. The question every analyst in Washington, Jerusalem, and Beijing is running right now is the same. Where does this go from here? There are 3 scenarios. Only one of them ends quietly. The first is controlled escalation. Both sides absorb strikes, conduct limited retaliation, and eventually signal through back channels that neither wants full conventional war. This has been the dominant pattern since 2019. It requires both sides to maintain rational cost-benefit calculations under sustained domestic political pressure. It has worked before. It is becoming harder to sustain the longer this continues. The second is miscalculation. One strike kills someone senior enough or destroys something symbolic enough that the political cost of restraint exceeds the military cost of escalation. The 1967 Six-Day War began this way. Decisions made in hours, based on incomplete intelligence, produced consequences that reshaped the entire region for decades. That mechanism is fully active in the current environment. The third scenario is deliberate escalation. One actor decides that the cost of a contained conflict now is lower than the cost of a larger conflict later, and intentionally crosses the threshold with full awareness of what follows. Elements of this calculation are already present in the current decision-making environment on at least one side of this conflict. The morning after any of these scenarios plays out looks nothing like the morning before, and almost no one in a position of power is talking publicly about what that morning actually requires. Every war plan ends at the moment of victory. Almost none of them describe what victory actually looks like the day after it arrives. 3 scenarios, 3 different paths to the same unanswered question. Now we ask it directly. If this conflict escalates to full conventional war between the United States, Israel, and Iran, what does this region look like 18 months later? Not in the press releases, not in the victory speeches, in the actual geography, the actual population, the actual power vacuum that fills the space where a government used to be. Iran is not Iraq in 2003. Its population is 88 million people. Its territory covers an area 4 times the size of Iraq. Its government, whatever its failures, commands a degree of domestic legitimacy built on decades of nationalist narrative that no military campaign can erase from the outside. A strike campaign that destroys Iranian missile infrastructure, command facilities, and naval assets does not automatically produce a stable successor government. It produces a power vacuum bordered by Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Turkey, and the Caspian Basin simultaneously. Every one of those borders is already under pressure. None of them absorb instability quietly. The generals who brief this privately know what the public statements never say. Destroying a military is the part the planning gets right. Replacing a state is the part it has never solved. Not in Vietnam, not in Iraq, not in Libya. Not once in the modern era of American military intervention. One radar screen lit up at 2:14 inches the morning. What followed was not just a missile exchange. It was the opening of a question that this region, and every power with a stake in it, will be answering for a generation. The threshold has been crossed. The morning after has already begun.